we'll just go through, I guess, your noticings and learnings from the work for this week, and then leave room at the end for kind of a free-flowing sense making, or we might decide to wrap up early depending on where people's energy is. And speaking of energy, the check-in question is, what is giving you energy this week? And I'll start. What's giving me energy this week is a little bit more space. I feel like this year I had an intention to be less busy, and it hasn't quite panned out that way. So from sort of August until maybe last week, I was averaging 15, 16-hour days, starting first call at 6 a.m., last call finishing at 9 p.m., traveling too much. And yeah, just really appreciating a little bit of spaciousness this week, and that's giving me a lot of energy. What about you, Jem? What's giving you energy this week?
My parents are here and my sister is here, so like all my core family is here, so like that's giving me a lot of energy.
Would you like to call in the next person?
Andre, would you want to go?
Yeah, sure. For me this week, actually, it's these calls, or the idea of like, participating in these sessions. Yeah, so I'm really excited about what's happening, and I'm started reading stuff and got the book. And give me a lot of energy. Oh, I'll select Kevin next. If you want to go.
It's always nice to see my dog again. Although when he barks at like 7 a.m., that's something I don't miss particularly. But it's always nice to always nice to see the canine fellow. And yeah, the energy of knowing that there's going to be delicious food at the end of the week keeps you going forward. David?
Hi. What's giving me energy this week? I'm sorry, my video's not. I'm sorry. I don't know if my lighting's good or anything. Okay, so I'm just finishing up celebrating Thanksgiving here, and it's fun. Different traditions, and it's actually a consensus Thanksgiving. It's a friend of mine from work and before consensus, so it's a lot of fun, and there's crazy dogs running around, which I'm not used to for holidays, so it's never boring. So who hasn't gone? Because I just joined.
Me.
Is everyone? Oh, sorry. Okay, Alana.
Thanks.
Is that you?
Yep.
Yeah.
What's giving me energy is today was like a work day for me. I traded my partner. Like yesterday I did parenting, and today I get to do work, and working is so much easier than running after a 1-year-old. So it totally feels like a vacation. I have all kinds of energy. Let's go.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. So it looks like we've got a bit of a split of humans from different teams. So Kevin, we've got you from Team Gernard. We've got Andre, you and Jem from Turkey, and David, you from Hapuka. So maybe I guess on that basis, Andre, Jem, would you like to share first where you've gotten to with your social contract and agreement? Anything you'd like to share, or any reflections on the process?
Andre, would you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. So we had our call yesterday where we just went through some ideas, like kind of principles. Just noted down some principles that we wanted to think about when we wrote well, we ended up wanting to have a manifesto for our group, for the ways we wanted to work and the way we want to, like our social contract. And I think, Jem, you also mentioned something about time zones.
Yes, I'm trying to find the chat. I can't see the chat right now. If you can give me like...
I have it here.
Do you mind sending something new just to like make it show up on my Slack again? I don't know why it's missing.
Sure. Seems I cannot really write this morning, but yeah, I just sent you that.
Okay. Now I got it. Perfect. So like the main things that we have is like, or like unfortunately I missed it because I had like a mice in my house yesterday, and I was like dealing with that. But Kamal and Andre got together and like they noted some stuff down, and then I added some things that when I was able to get online again. And main things that we got is like we have like to support each other, show up, keep each other accountable, get stuff done, be consistent, be honest, do things well, get things done fast, be aware of the words you used, be honest, give honest feedback, and then assume positive intent. These were the stuff that Andre and like Kamal got together. And then like we talked about like getting together like something like a manifesto, and then Kanwal suggested this Holstein manifesto. And if you guys don't know it, I'll give you the link. I loved it. It's actually an amazing poster thing to have in your house. Probably I just shared it. And then I added on foster positivity, put higher and higher goals, no drama, be energetic, bring out the absolute best in each other, eliminate distractions, and be stern toward yourself and tender towards others. Then we got into talking about in our chat how we could like set up like a protocol for dealing with like time period issues, but we haven't really like finalized anything about that yet.
The thing that hit me most was almost at the very end there, be stern with yourself and tender towards others. Can you say more about that?
That's just like something that I read in a book that I like highlighted when I was reading and kept it as a screenshot. It basically means like be disciplined and like make sure that you are like keeping yourself accountable and like be disciplined on your own, but when other people make mistakes, be like tender so that you don't get on them too much to like put them in like a negative state. Basically expect more of yourself than you expect of others.
Did you talk at all about like how to do any of these things, or are you just sort of keeping it to these are the aspirations, these are the ideals?
I guess it was like mostly aspirations, right, Andre?
Yeah, for now it was it was just aspirations.
Oh, I think that's okay. It's just interesting, like there are sort of design choices that you can make, I guess.
Mm.
Yeah.
For both of you, was it the first time that you'd ever done this kind of very early in a new team exercise in making your expectations explicit?
It was definitely for me the first time.
What did you notice about that? How did it feel? Was there anything surprising? Was it easy to just jam out a list? Just how was the process for you?
I
For
think it
me,
was. Sorry, go on, Jim.
No, go ahead.
Thanks. I think for me, because it was like a video call. It felt easier than I expected in a way. It felt like more organic. There were lots of. I mean, you noticed there were like, and because I was just writing the list as we were talking, so you saw. I don't know if there was a lot of honest related stuff, like be honest, like. And what I really liked was the balancing act of, I would say, well, I would love if people would just give me direct feedback without, worrying about me taking things personally. While Canwall said, oh, that's great. But at the same time, it would be great if we are aware of our words, because words do matter. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. So I quite like that. I quite like we ended up somewhere in the middle rather than if it was just one of us saying, oh, let's do this.
So when you do these like things together, you kind of like pull yourself towards like from one extreme to like compromise, I guess. Like I wasn't there, so like I can't actually comment on the experience, but like that seems like what happened. Is that correct? Did I get that correct?
In a way, yes. I suppose extremes is yeah, it's maybe it's a. I think I know what you mean, but yeah, I don't think we were in the extremes. It's just simply things that I think I would have missed if Canwall wasn't there, and maybe vice versa. And it feels like it's a more wholesome approach when more of us kind of pitch in, you know, and you added your thoughts as well, which I think are really good. Like, you know, bring the absolute best in each other, distant yourself, tender towards others. Like, so it just feels like each time we keep adding sort of, it feels like that metaphor, like the walking skeleton. Like you start with something and then you start adding, you know, muscles and stuff, organs, and you keep on building this image.
Nice. Kevin or David, do you have any questions or reflections for Andrea or Jem?
No, I agree that it's kind of like a process and that you got to bootstrap somewhere. And so, yeah, I think that's all I have to say.
Yeah, I have a question. So, if this is a new process for you and you found it easier and it challenged your preconceptions, for perhaps this new team, how do you think it would go if you went to a team you're already on and tried to do something similar? And how would you approach it? Same or differently from this?
That's a really good question, because that's something I wanted to ask Susan and Alana after these sessions. I think it would be much harder, in my opinion, just because when you start, like, we had the mindset of, okay, we need to do this homework, and let's explore how this works and do our best. So, and we were primed with the ideas from our previous call. If I were the one to initiate that in a team, I would have to kind of distill all that information that we had for this team, and to be clear enough and kind of, I think it will be very difficult. I would love to try it though, and I will try it. But I think I sort of, you're right, I think I need more tools in a way, like to be able to help people, expose this idea. Because if I just say, hey, let's do this social contract, like, okay, yeah, that's...
What's that?
But yeah, very good question. I don't really know the answer, to be honest, David.
Well, one thing I was wondering is, like, I think it sounds like you're right. Like, would they trust you? Do they get it? Can you communicate it? But also, like, there's that barrier of you've been operating implicitly with some sort of social contract, and the issue is maybe you have a different idea of that than other people. Maybe people know what your idea is and are either taking advantage of it or don't like it or whatever. And so I wondered, like, man, I agree that starting from scratch is easier, but I wonder if, like, a good starting place could be to say, there's this idea, it's a social contract, and however you communicate that, but say, let's figure out what we've already been doing and what rules we have, even if they conflict. And then you can look back and maybe say, how could we change them? And it might, like, prevent, like, difficult conversations, or I don't know. I'm just thinking there may be a way to say retroactively look at it to then make a new one, because otherwise they might not get it, or you feel like they're trying to step on their toes. But it's like, oh man, we all don't like this one thing. Like, that's a lot easier than, oh, let's do this new thing, and they don't know where you're coming from. But yeah, it sounds like then, sorry, are your teams, like, very stable, or are they changing all the time in your work? I'm just trying to understand, like, the space.
For me, my team is stable at the moment.
Yeah.
It's been stable. I suppose so I really like the idea of, like, finding one common thing that everyone or most people don't really like happening, and starting from there. But if we don't have that, I think the challenge would be, well, what problem am I trying to solve? Because then I'll be like, because I think what happens here, we all kind of volunteered in a way our time for this, and we want to explore this. But in a team, you would need a reason why you want to do this.
I mean, but Andre, do you feel like in your team there are some things that you wish would be explicit? Like, I don't know, some of the things, like some of my pet peeves. I'm always on time, and so like 1 minute or 2 minutes is okay, but like for me, it's really not okay for people to just cruise in when they want. Or, for example, phones or whatever. Is it okay for people to be on their phones in meetings? Like, those are like some of my pet peeves. John from the guy, I can't remember what team he's from Diligence. He shared with me this really amazing metaphor. It's what is your tolerance for dishes in the sink, right? So for me, for example, if there's a couple of dishes in the sink, I'll have to wash them. For other people, it's like, okay, into their tolerance is, okay, when no more dishes can fit in the sink, then I'll do the dishes. So like we make these assumptions about, at some stage, all the dishes will get washed, but it's a level of tolerance, and it's also, just, I guess, a level of expectations and our personal needs. So don't want to put you on the spot, Andre, but like in any of your teams, is there anything like that you actually wish, like one thing that could be explicit?
I suppose it's something a bit more like, for me, one thing I don't like, and it has happened in the past just because of my role being engineer, of ending up like working on a product that hasn't really found any market fit. And what I noticed in companies that where everyone is involved in the product decisions, they tend to fare much better when they launch that product because they do early testing and so on. So it's kind of like a bit of a higher level thing where I would love if people were encouraged and engaged in the product design more than just sitting in our own kind of boxes, or like, I'm a designer, I'm an engineer, I'm a DevOps, whatever, and not interact on those higher levels of like, where are we going? Why are we doing this? Who cares? So that is one of my one of my pet peeves. And
yeah, I'd love to encourage you to think about how maybe you could bring that to your team at some point.
Yeah, I mean that's why I'm here.
Yeah, cool.
Should we hear from David and Kevin about how your process is going, or maybe we can ask you some of the same questions? Don't know. Who wants to go first? Kevin, you're smiling. You can go first.
Yeah. So I think we might have gotten. Well, okay. So it's a little hard because we're quite spread out. One person's on the East Coast, one person on the West Coast of the NA, and then I believe one person's in Melbourne, and then another is somewhere in Southeast Asia. So we're pretty spread out. So finding times to sync was a little hard. So we agreed, let's make a stickies board and then put our ideas there initially. Because when we got out of the meeting last time, it was either getting late for some of us or it was just like right thing first in the morning. So we decided, okay, let's asynchronously put our ideas on this board, and then we can come back to sync some other time to discuss the results. That was supposed, to my knowledge, that was supposed to happen right after this meeting, but I think we may have had a miscommunication. So to be honest, that's a little bit of a peeve for me that it appeared that we made an agreement and then suddenly there's no shows. So I'm hoping maybe some people will come in after the call. Maybe they just can't come to this call specifically, but yeah, that's a little rough because I'm trying to imagine if we don't meet up now, more of our process has to be a little async. And I think for this assignment, it would have been nice to have some sort of combination of async and synchronization, like divergence, convergence kind of deal. But you just got to roll with the punches, I think, because I think everyone's life is just in flux. Yeah. So sorry, that was a little personal, but I'm just keeping it real. We did come up with some ideas. I'll kind of combine a few of them on here. There's this themes of like, yeah, we should continue to support each other to make each other successful. We need to definitely try and figure out how. There was this one sticky was like, how do we come up with terms with hypothetical equity? So like, yeah, how do we sort of deal with kind of maybe natural sort of implicit structures that form within the team, even if it's a team of 4, like you can tend to have like, like team leaders and stuff like that just naturally come about. So like, how do we sort of account for that to make sure that we're all being heard? I put down that we should not be afraid to be bold. So if there is something that is that needs to be done, just do it and then apologize for it later, assuming that you're working with the intent that you're doing it for the betterment of everyone, right? So, and then I also put this sticky that I think I carry over from my own team, which is that we should always have a humanity first approach. And that even if we have any like hiccups and even if like things like can get a little messy, we should still remember that we're all humans and that we shouldn't, in the grand scope of things, we really shouldn't get like super angry about things that may happen, right? Like including this, right? So even though I might be a little like, what happened, guys? I'm just going to let it roll, and just have good faith with people, right? Maybe we just need to be better at being very crystal clear about our agreements next time, right? And there's a few more stickies here, but I think I want to definitely talk with my team about it before we kind of like share. But yeah, we're getting there. I'll stop there for now.
That's so classic of like, how do we enforce accountability before we've had the meeting about accountability? Like, yeah, it's tough. Yeah, exactly. I don't know. It's just kind of got to start somewhere and start muddling through, right? And then as you get to talk to each other more and get to know each other more, then it hopefully starts getting easier. What were the questions that we wrote?
Go ahead.
We should grill Kevin with the same questions.
Go ahead.
What if anything felt surprising for you? And have you first of all, have you done an exercise like this before in any of your teams?
No. Oh, sorry, I'm cutting you off. Could you finish?
No, that's why. Just that's it. Like, have you ever maybe, or even maybe an approximation of this? Have you ever had an experience where you've made agreements like this explicit?
I think we've done a little bit of it before at MetaMask, where we just acknowledge this kind of like humanity first, work will follow. But nothing sort of like, to a little more of a salient and thought out degree. Like, I think, things about sort of like, how do we keep each other accountable? How do we what are our prioritized values? I think the last time we tried having that discussion, we ran into an issue of like, but what if we don't talk about our monetization structure? And how does that tie into our own values? And I think we maybe were conflating sort of the values of the product with the values of the team. And so, I think we haven't sort of gotten to sort of a very thorough process of really hammering it out. And like, I think what everyone else has said, a lot of it has just been implicit, kind of understand as you go, which works, I think, when you have small teams, because I think it's easier to sort of do the propagation that way when you just like learn by doing kind of deal. But in terms of scalability, now that we're at like 20 people, I think we're starting to see where the rust is showing.
Thanks. Alana, just wondering if you had any reflections in your experience doing this, trying to make things explicit in a product team, and if you can understand Kevin's point about conflation.
Yeah, interesting. I think there's a bit of a tension between it's really good to invest in these kinds of conversations and make explicit some things about how to work together, And another value that's good is like solving problems as they come up and not thinking you can understand everything that you need to know beforehand, and that you need to like take an iterative approach and like try some things and then learn from that experience. And then so in the past, one thing I've encountered is people's like assumption or fear or something that if you make this like these kinds of agreements, it means you're writing it in stone. And I don't think that's the way to go, because obviously we can't know ahead of time everything that's going to come up. Like the people could change, the circumstances could change. So then of course there's this balance of like, well, yeah, but if we're going to like trust these things and hold each other to them, they have to be written on something. Like how lightly or strongly are we going to hold these things? And I think we're going to talk about stuff like decision making in a different week. But I think it's like, if you have a process for how to change things that everybody knows and can engage with, then you can feel safe just like putting a stake in the ground and being like, cool, we agree this, and we're going to try it until we use this process that we have for changing things and for talking about things. And so if you've got a reflective practice where you're continually coming together and reflecting on how things are working for you and a way to change things, then you can get that feedback loop and iteration going. But like every part of this has a bootstrapping problem of like, how do you talk about the decision-making process without a decision-making process? And how do you talk about accountability without the accountability? So like starting anywhere is an achievement, honestly. Like whether it's like starting with just one-on-one conversations where you're exploring these ideas, whether it's like, hey guys, I found this model that this other team uses, let's just roll it out, or like wherever you start, as long as you have a good process for iterating, like it's way better than never starting. Those are the things that come to mind for me.
Yeah, I really agree with a lot of that, and especially for our team, it's a. Oh, I have two comments on that. One, sometimes I feel like the bootstrapping process is also a balancing act with people's existing time. Like this concept of like you're already bicycling and you need to fix your bicycle as you go. And it's like, how much time do you have to fix the bicycle without forgetting that you need to also pedal, right? So that's always a struggle, sort of making sure we're not biting into too much people's time. And that's another reason why I'm here, is because I want to make that process like optimized so that we don't have to spend hours upon hours doing this. So that's one thing. Second thing, I agree with the iterative process. I think definitely handle each case as you go and be very flexible. But I feel that there's also a case where there are certain sensitive parts of agreements that I think there's a cost to sort of doing them iteratively instead of preemptively. For example, in our team, we've been talking about how do we do like evaluations and determining that somebody's not up to par, right? And then like the process by which someone might have to like find another team, right? That's a really sensitive topic, and it's one that we don't want to have to figure out the time that we have it actually happen, right? And so, it's a little hard to like determine like how do we avoid that kind of awkwardness while also still being like iterative, right? And so it's very hard. Just wanted to express
I have a comment on that last one. So I think you're conflating avoiding and iterating, because it sounds like if you don't have the conversation at all, you are not iterating because the loop hasn't repeated. So like, to say, oh, when do we have that discussion is avoiding. But if you said, okay, how do we hold people accountable? Or sorry, what was the specific issue you said? Sorry, it was or when people aren't acting up to speed. What's the word you used? Like sorry, evaluating people and their performance. You said.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. It's sometimes words leave my head. But so what an iterative solution would be is like Alana says, like, okay, we're going to evaluate people every month and we're going to sit down with a blank piece of paper. You do that once and it was a disaster. And then you say, you planned ahead of time, we're going to change it for next month. And then after the second month, you say, wow, once a month is too often or not a little. This rubric we made was no good. But part of having a process that's, like she said, that's flexible means that you actually build in failure points and you warn people that it's just a trial, and you start simple and say, okay, we're going to go 6 months without evaluating people, but then we're going to evaluate and we're going to have a discussion about what it looks like. Try it and see what happens, and it's going to hurt. Now, is that the best way? No, but at least that's a way of iterating without fully stopping everything and solving it. But so like I said, that point is it sounds like iterating and avoiding are not at odds, because they're not, you can't iterate while avoiding. You know, you're iterating the question and never the answer. You're just repeating the question. Should we talk about it? No. Versus here's a solution. Let's see when it fails or how it fails. And if that's too painful, then yeah, maybe you have to spend more time creating an iterative process without pain. But yeah, it didn't sound iterative by the way you spoke about it, but I would agree that it feels iterative. So, but anyways, it's just an interesting. I've fallen in those same kind of traps myself as maybe you guys were describing.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, just going to say that brings up for me another tension that I was thinking about from you guys' comments, which is basically between discovering or making explicit what's already there versus designing in a more idealized way what should be there. And I think that I've tried it both ways in lots of different times. In terms of things like, like how do we evaluate performance? You can ask that in terms of like, well, how have we been doing it so far? And actually make that explicit, or actually be like, well, what is the more ideal process? And for things like conflict resolution, for example, is like a really classic one. Like, you don't want to have your first conversation about conflict resolution when a bad conflict has just arisen. Like, that's a crappy time. But it's always the case that if you aren't in the middle of a conflict, it's very hard to argue that, oh, it's a priority to do this. It's basically like any contract. It's like you're reading through the contract, like, how is this going to be relevant to my work? I don't need to read this crap. And like, it's like if things go wrong or something comes up, then it's super, super relevant. So I don't know. I think there have been times when I've thought especially in complex emergent networks, sometimes I feel like all you can do is actually be like an anthropologist and just try to figure out what's going on and how people are actually engaging and like write it down somewhere. And that's actually a huge step, much less trying to like design some ideal and then figure out how to like roll it out and make it work for everyone. And then sometimes I feel like, well, then how can we ever create something that's more ideal than what we've got naturally emerging if we can't do that process? So yeah, sorry, that's probably like way more questions than answers. But I'm just saying that was resonating for me a lot, like from what you guys were saying.
Cool. David, you want to share where your team got to?
Yeah. And I did have one more comment about the evaluating, is that it is overwhelming. I'm just like overwhelmed with the thought of doing it, even though I'm saying to iterate. And I think it goes back to when we were talking about feedback, is that feedback's hard in general. And if you learned how, through this course, how to give feedback more consistently, fairly, and productively, I think the leap between feedback and evaluation is much smaller than nothing and being evaluated. So I have a lot we could say about that later, because we don't evaluate yet, perhaps, but we do feedback, and we do consciously discuss feedback on our feedback, so that we feel a lot safer giving potentially really hard feedback to each other. At any rate, so I think that like that could be like a stepping stone that hopefully could help with a potentially more challenging conversation for Kevin. But yes, so our process. So a couple of things really resonated for me about what other people saying, like frustration at meeting times and like difficulty of scheduling, do we look at values versus principles? Do we talk about how to enable these things versus like say what are we trying to do with them? So right away during our chat with my team, we said, well, Thanksgiving is coming up in America and we all live here, and it's going to be really hard to sync up. And let's say we came up with an idea that let's work as a value in our contract as a principle, is that we work asynchronously first, and then when we have something to sync up on, we sync up on it. That's not always ideal. In some process situations, it's better to start synced and then diverge. But since we already had converged on this great lesson and had a 5-minute chat, we thought because of our schedule, let's be very explicit about like, we don't wait around for you to be available at the same time. Our value was, no, we work separately for this so we can work together. And then one of our team members, she was going to the Bahamas or something, and it was like, she was saying, oh, I can work until Wednesday. And we were listening, and it's like, well, when are you actually leaving? And one thing that I've noticed at Consensus, we have quote unquote unlimited PTO, and that people don't take it. And it's never like people stopping them. It's like that self-drive. You love your work and you feel responsible. So we were like, look, our first principle we just agreed on the spot was, you can't work when you say you're taking PTO. So you're not allowed to work. She's like, well, I'm not bringing my laptop to Cayman Islands. And we're like, okay, for this project, you need a day to get ready. So do not talk to us on Wednesday. You're not allowed to. And that puts some pressure on it, because that means we only had a day and a half. And so, but we put that value as like, when you believe you're on PTO, you don't have to work. And so if you're taking today off, that would be why they're not here, because we agreed on that. We didn't agree on what to do. We just agreed that we hold that above our self-help that high. And I looked back and I said, you know, I didn't agree to take any days off. I worked like 5 minutes today. I maybe had a couple of conversations because I'm with someone from Consensus on my team. But like, oh, okay, here I can come to the meeting. I can look over things because I agreed to that. So at first I was a little frustrated. We made a Trello board, or because I volunteered to do it and I put all this work into it. And then nobody put any cards in, and I didn't read the Slack, and I was starting to get agitated. But I looked at the board and it said, sync first, then sync up, don't work on PTO. So I said, oh, they're spending time with their families. They haven't maybe gone on vacation, but I know I told them I valued it, because I do. So I trusted that my team would do something. So one of them did. Like I woke up whatever this morning or whatever it was, and oh, there's a bunch of cards, and they self-organized and went in. And then the other person, like I said, we told her not to talk to us. She can work on other things. So my expectation is when she comes back from her trip, she's going to hop on and just knock our socks off. And then we're going to try to meet as soon as possible. And so going back to the comment earlier about like being frustrated about miscommunication, like we built in the expectation that we'd be miscommunicating over a holiday, so that like I could read my principal and say, oh my God, that was my idea. And I'm getting frustrated because but I was able to temper my own values. So basically beyond that, we haven't fully processed it, but our first thing was to just get any ideas out there, and then we can start iterating and meet to talk about them. But a lot of these things are very process based and like how to implement it. So because our biggest value was like to take care of ourselves, because we're learning how to self-organize. That also means to make sure we have time to and energy to do what we're organizing ourselves to do. So I believe it was Will, he put down, show up to all meetings prepared, commit to 3 hours of class. As for managing time zones, we will really optimize async. So right then and there, it shows that it's going to be hard, because we have to remember it's easier to work together, but we decided we're going to try to force ourselves to be really async, to then value as much as we could during the moment. And so everything like here we have is about like, you know, another example of a process is we will hold we'll hold each other accountable, and by viewing the activity in Trello. So he even said like what it looks like. He keeps going about communicating on Slack, not taking things personally when it's necessary to call each other out in a nonviolent way. So it was like, these are what we would call in psychology implementation intentions. Okay, since we're taking time off and we're not allowed to work or sneak work in, we're doing all these things asynchronously. Like literally, like I said, I just got these. It's so great. He says that means logging into Trello and reading the cards other people made, not just like, oh, we'll do it later. Like, no, it's not easy to go through a bunch of cards you didn't write and weren't there when they were written, and then talk with Slack. And when things are going wrong, like other people said, call each other out in a non-violent way. I mean, that I could put on the wall. Like, wow, like we set up a process, and then here it is, and we haven't even met yet, and we have a third person who gives input. So yeah.
Yeah, super beautiful. And I know that might sound like a weird word to say, but yeah, the power. I think, yeah, and just for me, it's just the power of intentionality of what's possible. Even though, as you said, you've never met each other in person, I sense that you already feel like you're developing a relationship that's maybe stronger than you have with some of the people you work with every day. So I find that super powerful and really interesting. And what could it be like if we did agree to do that within our teams? Before I grill you, I just want to quickly share. Somebody asked the question about how do you do this with a team when you've already been working for a while. This is just this is a DNA team. So DNA is the team that I'm part of, and we came together for an offsite a couple of weeks ago, and we decided that the stuff in our social contract or our way of being together with each other was pretty solid. But what we did was we decided to take it to the level of commitments and being more explicit. And I think this goes to Alana's question in the first case, which was what does it actually look like when you say you're going to do some of this stuff? So this is just another sort of, I guess, offer to go a little bit deeper if you fancied and get more into actually what does it actually look like. I think that, David, you got to a little bit of this when you were being explicit and specific about the time commitments. And yeah, what these kind of things mean.
I think there's different levels you can work at, right? Like, again, this is more like a design choice. There are times when like a single guiding principle is where you want to be focused on. Like, I think Susan mentioned Morningstar, the tomato processing plant, in the last session, and their thing is no coercion, and every single other policy or practice that they have basically flows on from that and are sort of just their current take on how best to implement no coercion. So that's amazing. That's the clearest, shortest vision statement or whatever for a company or a network that I've ever seen. Whereas sometimes what's called for is like a pretty detailed, quite operational list of like, this is how we're going to decide our holiday pay or whatever it is or how we're going to schedule our meetings. And then other times it's probably somewhere in the middle where it's like a list of really key principles and then trust that people will sort of work out the implementation details. And I honestly think that it's not like there's one right answer. It's just an interesting question to think about. What level do you want to pitch your agreements at? And especially and obviously this is more of an exercise. And then as you turn around and be like, cool, what if I rolled this out in my home team? Like Andre was saying, figuring out where to start. Like these kinds of design decisions probably go into, what is it that you're suggesting? But yeah, Susan, the poster that you just showed, I think it's really great to like work on a concrete example. And like, especially like recently I was involved in another project where they had like a really amazing thing they called terms of engagement. And one of the unique things about that project was it was a group of people who are interested in doing anti-racism work as Pakeha. Pakeha is the word for like non-Maori New Zealanders. And because of the way that the sort of stakeholding works in that group, those terms of engagement were set by our Maori mentors. And then it was up to us to figure out the implementation from those principles. And so interesting to think about like, oh, well, who are the stakeholders and who might be the right decision makers to set these terms that other people are then agreeing to step into and sign up for. So those are some questions to throw out there. Susan, yeah, I don't know if you wanted to continue looking at that poster or.
Yeah, we could do. I think the most impactful thing was that for us to decide to do this to be our main artifact going away from 3 days together, and just like the ritual of actually signing it. So we all signed it together. But I think that number 10 is probably really relevant as well. So we commit to reviewing these commitments quarterly. So as Alana was saying, this is iterative, and we believe so much that things will change and that we'll learn as we go. And other things some of these things may fall away, and some others might become important. But having that explicit commitment to reviewing these commitments quarterly is important, I think. I mean, like, and certain things are relating, like, more definitely to people's level of dishes in the sink around things like meetings. So, for example, we had on this number 5, this might seem fairly straightforward. So, DNA members will attend meetings relative to their commitments or decline publicly and give notice prior to the meeting. So we probably spend a good 20 minutes actually understanding what action works best for everybody or what everybody needs, what statement can meet the needs of all of the members in as regards to not turning up to a meeting. So yeah, this is just another example. Anybody else have any questions for David? I'd just like to spend a couple of minutes talking about the individual assignments. Okay, I'll take that as a no. Did anybody have a crack at the individual assignment, the immunity map?
Could I have a comment on our own process after
Yeah,
those? Yeah, I was wondering, like, you know, I put a comment in the chat that we were expecting that we would overpromise because of the holidays. And so it's interesting how very specific and implementation based we were. And I'm wondering, you know, since there are different levels, like, what would it have looked like on a regular week? And I don't know, like, would we have overpromised and then never met? Or would we have forced ourselves and, like, would we have been at the high level or the low level? I don't know, but it was really interesting just to wonder, like, wow, because we had this conversation, we really sat down and said, are you going to show up on Thanksgiving or not? And I was like, if I remember, and I did, and we were already done with dinner. If we're in the middle of dinner, I wouldn't even be here. So it was like, we actually got really low in the weeds, like, do we even have time to do this assignment? What would it look like? And it's because we were forced by a national holiday and a real vacation to get nitty gritty. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it's like, man, we just went with it. I never thought that the situation could change at what we would call in psychology, the level of construal, like how you construe the problem. And I don't know if people can hear over Zoom. I always think that's a weird word to pronounce, but construal. It's like, man, it has a lot of downstream effects, but people solve problems and stuff. And it just never occurred to me that, wow, like a holiday could make the, like, either, oh, we'll get it done and it never gets done, or you have to go like, wow, what tools are we checking when? I didn't write that, and that blows my mind because it makes me feel good to know that he realized that that's what I wanted to hear is what tools he'll check and when. But at any rate, I did write one more comment. Let's see if I can see it. Because you didn't ask me if we do this before, because maybe you remembered I mentioned it, but we iterate a lot on these kind of constructs, like a social contract on my team. And because it's a part-time team that I'm 50% allotted to, nobody else is, at least on paper. So like our principle is like, dishes in the sink get clean whenever. Like if I want to clean them right away, cool. If you just want to leave them there, cool. Just let me know, I'm leaving the dishes here. So someone could say, show up in a meeting and just disappear in the middle. And it's nice to warn, but we actually say like, oh yeah, you don't even have to interrupt us to leave. Just tell us at the beginning, and just when you're gone, if you don't say bye. Like we make it very explicit because it would be rude otherwise. But when someone new comes to the team, we're like, oh yeah, by the way, like he just mentioned he's going to go for this reason, and like that was more than he had to do, because for this level of commitment, the only way the project would happen is if we all had to be flexible and we upheld that, like, yeah, you know, some things come up, people don't show up, and we track hours and time. So it's like, yeah, you weren't at the call, so you don't get that hour, versus like you had to be there when there's something more valuable you could do. But I love the metaphor, because in some ways it's very chaotic, but we all discuss it ahead of time. And when someone else needs to do something like abandon us for a week, we actually have principles for like when to abandon and how, like, because we assume it's consensus, it's going to happen. So anyways, yeah.
Did you manage to do the individual assignment as well?
Me?
Yeah, you.
Or just, I didn't get a chance to.
Didn't get a chance. Oh, okay,
yeah,
cool.
No.
How about
I don't want
the rest of you? Has anybody taken?
Everyone else's time.
Did anybody else have an opportunity to do the individual assignment? I think that's a big no from everybody.
Okay, cool. Well, we'll get to it in the next few days. But if you have questions about it, please drop them in the chat. I haven't done mine yet, but I want to do mine personally as well because I haven't done it before and it looks pretty cool. But I will be dropping my questions in the Slack for all of you.
Yeah, and
I have
also,
one question.
yeah, sure.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
So I understand most of the columns, but I guess the assumptions column.
Yes.
Like, I guess what types of assumptions are we? What would be like an example? I guess.
Let me think about this. Just give me a second. So, for example, assumption would be let's just say, for example, my goal is to delegate responsibility more to my teammates. An assumption there might be my teammates will think less of me because they normally expect for me to have all of the answers. Or an assumption could be, I assume that if I delegate more of my responsibility, then things will take longer. I assume that if I delegate more of my accountabilities and responsibilities, I might be setting myself up to be overtaken by somebody in the team. Those are some examples of assumptions.
I see.
So assumptions might be assumptions that relate to your goal in a way that they hinder your goal from happening?
Or just what you assume will happen or what you assume could happen as a result of. It's not, and it doesn't necessarily even need to be hindering.
Could it be positive? Like I assume.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Obviously, it's an assumption that this change is like the right change to make, for example, or like, why do you think that? Those are probably assumptions too.
Absolutely. And I assume that if I do this, then I will have more time and be able to explore my personal development priorities that I haven't had a chance to do before. Something like that.
Another question, like the goal, should that goal, can that goal be like any goal about like our job, actually career, or like can that goal be like
about your life? It could be, I want to quit smoking.
Okay.
I think it should be a real one though, not a hypothetical one.
Definitely. Thanks, Alana. Okay, we're a minute over time, but I'd like to wrap us up with a checkout. And I was thinking about this, and I don't necessarily want to end with a negative, but it's kind of a funny negative. What's your least favorite Thanksgiving food? Mine is prob. Oh my gosh, Siri decided to send me to the ramen shop when I talked about Thanksgiving. That's kind of scary. My least favorite Thanksgiving food is probably yams with marshmallows melted on top. What about you, David? Least favorite?
Stuffing, believe it or not.
Alana?
Also,
yeah? Sorry, finish.
I want to comment myself for being late. Is that I was looking at the counter on my call, so I thought you were. It says 50 minutes, and I didn't realize it was at 60 because I was late. So that's supporting your belief in being on time. Then you don't have to sync up your timer with your call.
Thanks.
Good noticing, David. Thanks for tuning that in. I really don't like white meat, like turkey or chicken or anything like that. And sometimes it's just like by the time we get to the platter, it's only white meat, and I feel a little disappointed because I love Thanksgiving food. And just on the note of the sweet potatoes with marshmallows, my partner was, I don't know how he got into this, but found the recipe page on the Fig Newtons website, and they were just basically trying to get Fig Newtons in every Thanksgiving food. They're like, crumble Fig Newtons on top of your sweet potatoes, put Fig Newtons in your stuffing. I'm just like, no. So yeah, horror show.
Ilana, honestly, fig toppings sound amazing. If the fig, you mean the fruit, right? Yeah, that sounds actually amazing. I love it.
It's like a cookie made from that fruit. So they're really trying to push it in.
I see.
All right, Jen, what's your least favorite Thanksgiving food?
Very similar to what Alana said. I really like don't appreciate like white meat a lot. So like the turkey is like not a favorite of mine. How about
Kevin?
you, Andre?
Oh, Andre.
I'll let Kevin go because I actually never attended a Thanksgiving evening, so but it would probably be dry, turkey meat. It's quite hard to do turkey. So.
Yeah, this is the reason we don't do turkey at our Thanksgiving. It's just not a popular meat. It's like, why? Because tradition. And like, no, let's not do that. But actually, for me, it's green beans. I can't do green beans. No.
Like green beans and mushroom soup with dried onions on top, those kind of green beans?
No, just straight up.
Okay.
Straight up green.
Awesome. Thanks, team. So yeah, I will send the reader for next week within the next 24 hours, but don't get distracted by that until you publish your assignments from this week. And everybody have a great weekend and look forward to seeing you all on Monday/Tuesday, wherever you are in the world.
Where do we publish our assignments? Do we publish our assignments somewhere?
Yes, so publish them to the Google Drive or into Slack,
Okay.
your choice.
Okay. All right, cool. Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.